Welcome to this lecture on media and social life, theories and issues. In this lecture, we'll look at three main issues. First, we'll highlight how to conceptualize the role of media in contemporary society. Second, we'll drill down further and look at media through the lens of the primary sociological paradigms. Third, we will come to rest on the question of the dynamic relationship between the power of media influences on the one hand and the power of audiences on the other. For most of us, the world of what we know by way of direct first-hand experience is very small indeed. But somehow we are worldly. We have a sense of what it means to be a Canadian. We know about the latest news of Drake or Donald Trump. We are informed about election results, both near and far. That worldliness is almost entirely due to our immersive relationship with media. Our window on the world is the media. So if you can imagine looking through a window to learn about the world, a sociologist will ask some critical questions about the window. Does it provide multiple views, or are you restricted to looking in one direction? Does it enable breadth of vision, or is it a narrow porthole, like the aircraft window on this slide? Is the glass clear, or is it fogged over, or partially obscured? Because we are so dependent on the media to show us the world accurately, these questions are well worth asking. They are actually matters of life and death. To complicate things slightly, media organizations aren't charities, they are also businesses. Just over a year ago, Canada's two largest newspaper companies swapped 77 community newspapers and then shut most of them down. Now, they did this because a lot of newspapers are losing money, but the result is a lot fewer media voices in smaller communities. To go back to the metaphor of a window on the world, that particular window just shrank significantly in size. Now that we have done the groundwork for a general way of understanding media from a sociological perspective, let's look at how the major sociological paradigms deal with media. Most of the names on this list, functionalism, conflict theory, and feminism, will be familiar to you. The exception will be interpretive approaches. As you know, functionalism is always concerned with how different components of the social system contribute to its overall stability. The more complex the society, the trickier the task of holding it together. So, for functionalists, the importance of the media is that it plays a coordinating function that is crucial to social unity. Seeing yourself as a Canadian is really about participating in what sociologist Benedict Anderson called an imagined community, ideas and symbols that we partake in almost exclusively through the media. The media also play a growing role in socialization, to the extent that some are arguing that it has at least partially replaced functions that used to be more the job of the family. Media are also flagged as performing a social control function. From last week, we have the idea that our knowledge of crime and deviance, courtesy of the media, helps us to conform. Finally, functionalists understand that the need to escape from the stresses of modern life is met by the entertainment media. Now, the perennial problem with the functionalist paradigm is selective inattention to social inequality. This is why functionalist approaches to media have been criticized for downplaying the ways in which the media are in fact involved in reinforcing social inequality, and overplaying the degree to which media actually serve everyone's interests. You might say that functionalists are rightly accused of presenting a window on the world that is suspiciously friendly to the interests of the people who control a lot of its resources. And that's what brings us to the conflict theory perspective. For conflict theorists, there are two issues with the media. First, they argue that media are centrally involved in the creation of what I like to call consensus reality. In other words, media present the world to us in ways that create acceptance of the dominant ideology, and which throw into question alternative ways of looking at society. News media, for instance, invariably cover social protest as negative or even deviant, focusing on its sensational rather than substantive aspects. The protester with dreadlocks and a Molotov cocktail instead of the reason for the protest. Climate change offers another example of media myth-making. Worldwide, the scientific consensus about human-caused climate change is almost unanimous. However, according to a recent study, almost half of all Americans don't believe in it. Why not? Surely a lot of the blame must be put at the feet of TV political panel discussions, which present every issue with experts arguing for it and against it. The result is that climate change, for instance, is presented as a matter of opinion instead of scientific fact. Meanwhile, sea levels continue to rise and violent storms become more common. The second issue about media for conflict theorists has to do with media control. The fact that worldwide the ownership of media corporations is concentrated in the hands of a relatively small, powerful elite. Globally, 6 media conglomerates control almost everything. And over time, the concentration of media ownership has intensified. To quote an old Radiohead lyric, the big fish eat the smaller fish. Think again about that example I mentioned of the corporate swap of community newspapers and how many of them were shut down right after. So here is the sticking point for the alarm bells that are rung every time a larger media corporation swallows a smaller one. Yes, the window on the world gets a little smaller and more homogeneous as there are fewer perspectives being offered, which is the point of the cartoon on this slide. But does it also mean, as some conflict theorists suggest, that there is a grand media conspiracy to control our minds, or that oppositional viewpoints have been silenced? The answer has to be no. Modern electronic media platforms are full of dissenting views, especially on social media, and vigorous debate on the editorial pages of the newspapers that are still in business is alive and well. More about that when we get to interpretive approaches. But first, we look at feminist contributions to the study of media. For many years, feminist sociologists have analyzed the mass media in terms of how it reflects and reproduces various forms of oppression against women. Your textbook mentions some interesting research on how women are portrayed stereotypically in the media, and for that matter, how men are too. So, gendered stereotypes are ubiquitous in the media. In this week's seminar, we look at some striking feminist-influenced research on gender and sexuality in print media. You can see from this emphasis on gender-based inequality in the mass media the long shadow of conflict theory as an influence on feminist sociologists, especially in past years. More recently, feminists have paid more attention to interpretive approaches to media, to which we now turn. Interpretive approaches to mass media are sometimes called cultural studies and are very much in line with symbolic interactionism in sociology. Unlike a conflict theory approach to media, which assumes that we are automatically influenced by the power of media, the interpretive paradigm takes seriously what audiences do with the messages that bombard them. The bottom line here is the notion that every message is intended to be interpreted a certain way. When you watch a film in the X-Men, Terminator, or Die Hard series, there is no mistaking who you are supposed to root for. However, every audience filters messages in terms of its own values and interests. For you or I to cheer for Bruce Willis in the Die Hard series seems like a no-brainer, but one study by John Fisk showed that it isn't so simple for an audience of homeless men at a shelter who identified with the villains led by the late actor Alan Rickman. Why? As people marginalized from the American dream, they identify with the route that the terrorists are taking to achieve wealth and success. If you haven't already watched the Honda Odyssey commercial in this week's folder, check it out. It's pretty clear what the intended message is. The family is happy and safe thanks to their Honda van. However, the commercial also begs to be interpreted as an unintended commentary on how technology alienates people from one another. The only person in the van not plugged into a device and isolated by it is the driver. To sum up the interpretive approach to mass media, messages do things to audiences, or try to. But audiences also do things with messages. Any media content can and probably will be deliberately misread or contested. The sociologist John Fisk of the Homeless Study likes to call this phenomenon audiencing. You might see audiencing as the media equivalent of scrawling graffiti on a wall. It is an audience's way of talking back. In other words, although the interpretive school recognizes the immense power of media in modern society, it also stresses that media audiences have some degree of agency. Thanks a lot for checking out this lecture. See you in the seminar.